Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late now. Let's get into today's tale. My parents always favored my sister, even refusing to let me live at home while she got her own apartment paid for. So I slept in my car. 3 years later, she showed up at my wellness retreat and scoffed, "You teaching mindfulness?" But then my celebrity client said, "She saved my life. You couldn't even save your GPA." I don't think there's a single moment I can point to and say, yes, that's when I stopped believing my parents would ever treat me the same as my sister. It wasn't a thunderclap. It was a slow accumulation, a drip, drip, drip of favoritism, subtle dismissals, and deep sighs that eventually soaked into my bones. By the time I was 25, I was sleeping in my car behind a grocery store in Flagstaff. The irony, my younger sister Kaya had a 2-bedroom, downtown apartment paid for entirely by our parents, even though she dropped out of college and was doing God knows what when I asked to stay at home for just a few months while I found stable footing post-graduation. My mother looked at me, all sad eyes and forced empathy, and said, "Mira, it's not a healthy space for you anymore. You need to figure things out on your own. You're strong." They always framed abandonment as empowerment, so I did figure it out on my own alone with no soft place to land, no safety net. I'd park in gym parking lots to shower before my shift work evenings, at a bookstore, and take on early morning yoga classes wherever I could find them. I was exhausted, brittle, and completely invisible to the people who were supposed to know me best. But the worst part, I stopped expecting anything different from them. So when I finally started building something of my own, a small self-run wellness retreat tucked just outside Sedona, I didn't tell them I didn't want congratulations or validation. I wanted peace, not approval. Just quiet. Then Kaya showed up in a Tesla. No less the same sister who laughed at my hippy-dippy life now needed a reset, and she booked my retreat under her married name like I wouldn't recognize her. She stepped onto my property with those designer sunglasses and a posture that screamed entitlement as I welcomed the group with a warm, practiced openness. She gave me one long, skeptical look and muttered, under her breath just loud enough for others, "To hear you teaching mindfulness." I didn't answer, not out of shock, but because I didn't need to. I'd had 3 years to unclench every muscle in my body that once bristled at her judgment. She couldn't take anything from anymore. The retreat was 5 days long. I thought maybe she'd just blend in, play nice, and move on. But Kaya never could let someone else have the last word. Not even when she was a guest in their space, she criticized the meals. Is this really gluten-free interrupted group? Reflections. I just think we should be more logical here, and I rolled her way through every meditation session. It was like watching a teenager trying to look cool at her mom's book club. The rest of the group kept their distance, unsure of how to engage with someone, so obviously performing discomfort. The group included all kinds, burned-out therapists, a former ER nurse, a teacher from San Francisco who'd recently retired. But the standout was Thalia Quell. Yes, that Thalia, famous actress, divorced. Retreating from the spotlight and trying to find a way to sleep again, without pills. I didn't treat her any differently. That's why she came here. That's why they all came here. Thalia took to the practices slowly, but sincerely. She cried during our sound bath session. She planted mint in our community garden with reverence. She asked good questions during silent hikes and listened more. Then she spoke. Kaya couldn't stand it. Midway through the retreat we hosted a small reflection circle. It was just supposed to be a quiet moment, a chance for those who wanted to share a breakthrough to do so. Thalia spoke first. Her voice was steady, low, deliberate. I came here feeling like a ghost of myself. I'd been talked to for years. Manager, sex, husbands, press people. I forgot what it felt like to be with someone. Mira helped me feel like a person again, a real one. You could hear her words settle into the wood-paneled walls. I saw people nod. I felt my own eyes blur. And then Kaya spoke. She didn't say anything about the practices. She didn't reflect on her experience. She just turned toward Thalia and asked, smiling that too smooth, too fake smile, "Do you really think this is like a real retreat? I mean, Mira's always been a little intense and dramatic." It was quiet for a second. Too long. I watched Thalia blink once, then look at her like she was a cracked mirror. She saved my life. Thalia said you couldn't even save your GPA. You know when someone says something so sharp, so perfect, you almost wonder if it was scripted. But it wasn't. It was just truth. I think everyone in that room felt it. Kaya stood up, muttered something under her breath, and walked out of the room. She didn't come back. She left their treat, the next morning's suitcase dragging across the gravel driveway, not saying goodbye to anyone but the Ripplers. She left behind those were real, and so was what came next. After Kaya left, the air felt noticeably lighter, like we'd collectively exhaled a breath we didn't realize we were holding. I went about the rest of the retreat as usual. Morning breathwork, herbal tea by the stone garden guided silent walks through the juniper trails. Nobody mentioned Kaya directly, but a few people gave me those knowing glances. Kind, supportive, almost protective. Thalia didn't bring her up again either. She simply returned to the rhythm of her retreat like she had pressed a reset button on the entire dynamic. And honestly, I was grateful not for the jab she delivered, though it had been a surgical kind of justice, but for the clarity it brought. That moment forced something to the surface that I had buried deep under years of appeasement, politeness, and emotional self-bargaining. I hadn't imagined the imbalance in my family. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't just overly sensitive, as my mom liked to say. Whenever I tried to voice how hurt I felt, it was real. And now others have seen it too. That quiet validation changed something in me, not loud or vengeful, but sure, a quiet lock clicking into place. I wasn't crazy. I had been sidelined, underestimated, dismissed, and I had survived anyway. The retreat ended 2 days later. I hugged each guest goodbye as they left, offered them little sachets of lavender and rosemary from the garden, and thanked them for showing up fully. Thalia lingered a bit longer, helped me clean the tea mugs without asking, then gave me a long hug before leaving. "You're good at this," she said, into my shoulder. "Don't shrink around people who only feel tall when you're small." I never forgot that, but it wasn't until a week later that the real fallout began. It started with a text from my mother. Just one line. "Your sister said you embarrassed her in front of everyone." No, how did the retreat go? No, we're proud of you. Just that I didn't answer. Right away, I let it sit there glowing on my screen like a warning flare. I wanted to throw my phone, but instead, I placed its screen down and went to pull weeds in the herb garden. My go-to therapy the next day. Another message. "She's still your sister. Row. She's going through a lot. Be kind." And that's when I snapped, not outwardly, not loudly, but in that irreversible internal way, the kind of snap that makes silence feel sharper than any response. Be kind. I had been kind. I had been patient, understanding, forgiving, silent, invisible, and still the story being told. Behind my back was one of cruelty. Mine, not theirs. So I replied, "Finally. I will always treat people with kindness, but I am not responsible for her shame." And that was it. No big blow up, no dramatic family showdown, just a line drawn, a line I should have drawn years ago. Still, the emotional whiplash caught up with me after the retreat. I took a week off. I didn't lead classes. I didn't garden. I barely checked my email. I just rested, because there's a unique kind of fatigue that sets in when you spent your whole life trying to earn love. From people who see you only in pieces. It doesn't hit all at once. It accumulates, and then it collapses on day 4 of that week. I got a knock on the retreat gate. Not a phone call, not a booking request. A literal knock. I opened it, and there they were. My parents, Teresa with her flowy cardigan, and Peter in his usual sandals and socks. Combo holding a gift basket like this was a holiday, and not a deeply overdue conversation. "We thought we dropped by," my dad said. I should have said no. It should have closed the gate gently but firmly. But some piece of that old programming still lived in me, the part that believed if I let them in just this once, maybe they'd finally see me. So I let them in. They looked around like tourists in a space they never believed I could build. "This is lovely," my mother said, scanning the prayer flags and succulents. "You've really done something here." I stayed silent. I wasn't ready to ease into small talk. They sensed it. "We want to understand. What happened?" my father said. Kaya was very upset. I folded my arms. "She was cruel," I said simply in front of others in my space. "After everything I've been through and everything you've let her get away with." She walked into my life and tried to tear me down again. Teresa looked like she was about to say something soft and deflective, but I cut in. I slept in my car for nearly a year while she lived in an apartment you paid for. I came here with nothing. And I built this with no help. Not from her, not from you. And when you heard I'd finally done something worthwhile, your first message to me was about how I made her feel bad. The air buzzed with that too familiar silence, the kind that always used, to make me backtrack, but I didn't. Peter lowered his eyes. Teresa's mouth trembled slightly. She set the gift basket down like she realized it was the wrong offering. "We didn't know it was that bad," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," I said, because Kaya was easier to root for. They didn't argue, and that silence for once felt like something different, not dismissal. But reckoning, they sat down with me in the garden on the long cedar bench I had built myself during my second winter here. It creaked. Under the weight of the moment, more than their bodies, for a long time none of us spoke. The breeze moved through the prayer flags overhead, brushing them just gently enough to remind us that the world was still moving, even when families were stuck. My mother was the first to try again. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we were doing what was best for both of you." I looked at her, trying to match her tone. But I couldn't. I wasn't in that place anymore. I didn't want to make them feel better. I wanted them to see it, really see it. "You mean you thought Kaya needed more help and I'd figure it out on my own?" My father's eyes welled up, which was rare. He wasn't a crier when my grandfather died. He nodded once at the casket and said, "Tough man, would have hated the flowers." That was the extent of his emotional availability. But now he looked at the rosemary growing wild behind the bench and blinked slowly, like the sight of something thriving made him ache. I think we didn't know how to show up for you when..." "You didn't ask that." Sentence landed heavier than he probably realized, because that's exactly what it had always been. I didn't beg Kaya. Did she perform her pain loudly? I buried mine in journals and part-time jobs, in perfection, and I had been punished. For being low maintenance? I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. Maybe they knew. My mother fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. She looked smaller than I remembered. "We always thought she was more fragile. She said that you were stronger." I nodded. Once slowly, "And you used that to justify never asking if I was okay." Teresa didn't respond. Her hands trembled. I think she wanted me to say something like, "I understand," or "It's okay." But I couldn't lie, not anymore, not for their comfort. Instead, I stood, "I need to get back to work." I said, "The next group arrives in 3 days. They looked startled, as if expecting more closure, some warmth to wrap it up. But healing isn't an epilogue sometimes. It's just a line drawn where a door used to be before they left." My dad turned to me. "I want Toby better," he said. "If you'll let me," I didn't promise anything. I just nodded that evening as the sun dipped behind the sandstone cliffs. I walked the edge of the property, barefoot, grounding myself back in the life I'd built. The land was quiet, sacred in a way that didn't need validation. And I realized something. I didn't need them to be better to move forward. I just needed them to stop pretending they hadn't been part of what I'd survived. A few days passed, then a week, then 2, and then another envelope, this time in the retreat mailbox, not the usual P.O. box where family bills and stray alumni newsletters went to be ignored. The handwriting was unmistakable, flowing slightly too perfect. Kaya's. I stared at it for a full hour before opening it. Half of me expected a performative apology, or worse, a passive-aggressive explanation that tried to rewrite everything with her as the misunderstood protagonist. But when I opened the letter, it wasn't anything I'd expected. It was simple 2 pages, handwritten, not overly emotional, not manipulative, just raw. She admitted she'd always known she was the favorite. She said it made her feel powerful, then guilty, then angry, like she resented me for not fighting back harder, for being the mirror that reminded her how much she hadn't earned what she'd been given. She talked about her marriage, how she'd married someone who treated her the way she assumed was normal, hot and cold, lavish and cruel. How she ended up in therapy, not because she wanted to change, but because she started to feel like she was becoming our mother. "I didn't come to your retreat to heal." She wrote, "I came to prove you were still beneath me, but you weren't. You were whole, and it scared the heck out of me." She ended the letter with one line that hit harder than I wanted to. "Admit I don't want to. Keep being the person they told me I was." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with my old journals, the ones I used to write in late at night, while trying to keep my tears quiet, so no one in the house would hear. I didn't respond, not right away. Because forgiveness, I've learned, is not a one-time declaration. It's a process. It's unspoiling. Sometimes it's a decision you have to keep making every day. I went on with the next retreat. New faces, new stories. One woman who had lost her adult son, another who had just walked away from a 25-year marriage. All of them are looking for some sense of who I am now. And in the quiet between sessions and the long pauses between heartbreaks, I began to think not about what Kaya had taken from me, but what I had built in spite of it. I had built something real. The days that followed were filled with the kind of silence I used to dread, but now welcomed. It wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. My body felt different, like it had exhaled. Something it had been holding in since childhood, but that letter from Kaya, it lingered. I'd read it 3 times since placing it in my drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because it was the first time in our entire lives that she'd ever truly admitted what I had always known, and maybe what she had known too, but refused to face. She knew she was favored. She knew she'd benefited while I broke, and now she wanted to be seen differently, wanted to be better. But here's the thing. No one tells you about being the strong one. Even when people finally see your pain, they still expect you to do the heavy lifting of reconciliation. It's like being handed a rope fray at both ends and asked to weave it back into something solid with nothing but your bare hands. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I just didn't know if I had it in me to do that work again, this time with her. The next retreat came and went. A quiet group of women escaping the grief of an empty nest. A couple trying to decide if their marriage was worth salvaging. They came, they healed. They left little thank you notes tucked under teacups and inside pillowcases. One note simply read, "I remembered how to breathe again." I carried that with me for a while, then out of nowhere. Another letter this time, not in the mail hand delivered. I came back from an early morning walk and found it tucked under a crystal on the wooden bench near the garden gate. Kaya had been here. The letter was shorter than the last row. "I know you don't owe me anything, and I don't expect an invitation. But if you're ever willing to let me show up for you, really show up, I'll be here. No pressure. No performance. Just me." Kaya this time. I didn't cry. I just sat with it. Because somewhere under the years of tension and competition and quiet pain, we were still sisters. Not close. Not connected in that effortless best friend way. Some sisters are, but bound nonetheless by the strange intimacy of shared history. Still, I didn't write back, not yet. Instead, I told myself I would wait for her to show me. Not tell me I'd spent enough of my life interpreting words that never aligned. With actions, weeks passed. The letter sat in my kitchen next to a jar of chamomile and a stone from Cathedral Rock I used as a paper. Life moved forward, and then in late September, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, is this Mira?" "Yes, this is Marin. I work with the Sedona Women's Renewal Collective. One of your past clients nominated you to speak at our annual event on holistic healing and trauma recovery. Would you be interested?" I almost dropped the phone. It turned out Thalia had quietly submitted my name, and a letter of recommendation said I'd changed her life. I'd changed her life. Said others needed to hear from someone who healed, not by being saved, but by surviving. So 2 months later, I stood in front of 400 women therapists, counselors, community leaders, and told my story. Not the sanitized version, the real one about sleeping in my car, about not being believed, about carrying the weight of 2 families, my actual one, and the one I had to build for myself when I finished. The applause was generous, but subdued, the kind of respect that sits quietly in the heart. Instead of erupting in noise, I stepped off stage and took a deep breath. And that's when I saw her in the back row, near the aisle, sitting quietly. Not with fanfare, not trying to be seen. Kaya. She didn't try to approach me. She didn't rush to the front or throw her arms around me in some performative reconciliation. She just nodded once and then she left. But the nod, it was everything. It was finally not an apology, not a request, but our recognition. She saw me, really saw me, not the sister she once resented for being too perfect, not the mirror she hated looking into, not the burden of guilt she never wanted to carry, just me. Mira, a woman who had stopped asking for space in her own story and started taking it. I didn't run after her. That was the old version. Of me, the Mira, who'd bend, shrink, and follow anyone who might love her a little. If she just softened herself enough, that version of me would have chased her into the hallway, asking if the nod meant she was sorry, or if we were okay, or if things could go back to how they were. But I didn't want things to go back. I wanted something new, something honest. And I knew by the way she walked out, unhurried, head slightly bowed. No audience needed that, she did too. That moment stayed with me, not in the loud way. Some memories echo, but in the quiet way. Healing sometimes arrives like finally taking off a shoe that never fit after years of walking miles in it. I didn't hear from her again for a while, which was fine. I stayed busy. Retreats started filling up. Months in advance, I hired another instructor to help with weekend groups. I even splurged on a professional website with real photography and client testimonials. It felt like the world was catching up to what I had known for a while. I wasn't just doing okay. I was thriving, but growth doesn't erase grief. It just gives it more space to breathe. There were still days I caught myself staring at families who came to retreats together, mothers and daughters learning to talk again, sisters setting boundaries over herbal tea, and I'd feel that paint. Had old ache, not envy, just loss, because even if we were moving towards something healthier, I'd never have the kind of sibling bond one once imagined, the sleepover type closeness, the constant inside jokes, the she's my best friend kind of thing. That wasn't us. Maybe it never would be, but one afternoon, several months after the talk, a package showed up at my retreat gate. No note, no return address, inside a photo album, leather-bound, hand-stitched, the kind artisans sell at the farmer's market downtown. When I opened it, I didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't what I found. It wasn't family photos or childhood memories. It was my retreat. My land, my work photos, dozens of them, carefully taken, sunlight cutting through. The sagebrush at dawn, clients in meditation circles laughing and crying, a hummingbird pausing midair by the lavender rose, even one of me back-turned, guiding a group down the trail behind the house. I recognized the angles, Thalen's. It was Kaya's work. She had studied photography in college before. Dropping out, I'd forgotten about that. She hadn't. Inside the front cover was one line pressed in tiny gold foil. This is what I see now. That time I cried, not the ugly gasping sobs of rage or despair, the quiet tears of someone being seen after a lifetime of being overlooked. She hadn't tried to write another letter. She hadn't asked for another chance. She just gave me a mirror, a real one. Not the kind she used to hold up to my worst, but one that reflected the truth she never let herself see. I made something beautiful. A week later, I called her. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I didn't plan to forgive or confront or explain. When she picked up, her voice was soft, almost scared. Ro, I didn't say anything. For a moment, then you came back. You stayed for the whole talk I did. She said, why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want you to think I was there to take anything. I just wanted to witness it. I needed to. Another silence, but it wasn't heavy. This time it was full. I got the album. I said. She inhaled. Slowly did. It feel okay. It felt honest. We didn't say much more that day. We didn't make promises. We didn't make plans. But for the first time in our lives, we weren't trying to one-up each other. We weren't stuck in roles someone else had assigned as Kaya, the fragile favorite, Mira, the quiet achiever. We were just two women sisters, both trying to do better. After that, things unfolded slowly, the way real healing does. She started visiting Sedona once in a while, not for retreats, just to help. She took photos for my website, helped repaint the guest cabins, learned how to make the herbal compresses clients took home. Sometimes we still argue. Sometimes she slipped into old tones, old postures. So did I, but now we caught ourselves. We laughed more, cried sometimes too. And eventually, one evening over tea, she said something I hadn't expected. I was jealous of you. I blinked. Of me, she nodded. Not ashamed. You never begged for love. I always needed them. To choose me, you just kept going. I smiled, not bitterly, but with a deep understanding. I kept going because I didn't have a choice. She looked at me, nodded, then said, I'm starting to understand what that costs a person. We didn't hug, we didn't play out some movie moments, but the air between us shifted for the first time. It wasn't a battlefield, it was a bridge. It's been 2 years since that bridge started to form. We've been rebuilding ever since, not like a house you're desperate to move into, but like a garden you tend to when you're ready, a little at a time. Kaya is not my best friend. We don't talk every day, But when she comes by the retreat now, she doesn't walk in like she owns the place, or worse, like she's a stranger. She comes in through the kitchen door, barefoot carrying her camera bag, and asks what's blooming. Sometimes we work in silence. Sometimes we share memories, piecing together the same past from completely different angles. It's surreal how two people could live under the same roof and carry such different versions of the same story, but we both carry it now together. She told me once during one of our late-night fireside talks that it took seeing me through other people's eyes to realize who I had become, that she always thought I was good in the way that was boring, safe, predictable. But you're not safe, she said, poking at the fire with a stick. You're grounded. That's scarier. Honestly, you don't need anyone to complete you. It was the kindest thing she's ever said to me. As for my parents, well, that's been slower. They've started to show up hesitantly in small, imperfect ways. My mom sent me a birthday card this year that didn't include a comparison that was a first my dad. Texts sometimes, mostly articles about mindfulness or old pictures he finds in the garage. I've stopped hoping for the kind of apology I wanted at 25. I'm learning to accept the gestures they can give. We have boundaries now, not walls, just clear lines. I don't let them guilt me into visits, and they've stopped treating Kaya's needs as more urgent than mine. Or if they do, they don't expect me to play along. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. And that honestly is better. This past spring, something happened that felt like a quiet full circle. Thalia came back. Not as a client, just as a friend. She'd been filming something in New Mexico and decided to stop by. Brought wine, a giant sun hat, and no entourage, just her. We walked the trail at sunset, the one that loops behind the property and opens up to the red rock cliffs. She looked around, smiled, and said, "Still magic." Then out of nowhere, she asked, "Whatever happened to the sister?" I laughed. "She's around, shoot a lot of my photos." Now she paused, good. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You know, when I came here the first time, I thought you were peaceful because you had it easy, but you're peaceful because you've walked through heck barefoot. And now you know how to keep the flames from reaching others." That night, I found Kaya sitting on the porch swing, editing photos on her laptop. "Thalia's here," I said. She didn't even flinch. "Tell her," I said. "Thank you for saying what no one else ever dared to." Then she looked up and grinned. And for blowing up my ego so hard, I finally had to look at myself. We laughed. And for the first time in decades, it didn't feel complicated. It didn't feel forced. It just felt right. I don't believe in karma the way some do. I don't think the universe balances every scale exactly. But I do believe that when you let go of proving your worth to people who refuse to see it, you make room for others who do. I spend years aching for someone to stand up for me. Now I stand for myself, and when I speak, people listen. Not because I demand it, but because my life speaks louder than their doubts ever did. So yes, I slept in my carrier as my parents chose my sister again and again. Yes, she walked into my world, tried to mock it, and got humiliated in front of people who finally saw me. But that's not the story anymore. The story is this. I built peace from pain. I grew something beautiful from the scraps no one wanted. I opened the door. They locked, and I didn't burn the house down when I left. I built a whole new one across the canyon, and slowly, quietly, one by one, they came. To me, not to rescue, but to learn. And that, more than revenge, more than validation, is the ending I never knew I needed, the one I wrote myself.